Hey everyone, it's Delor, and today I wanted to show you how we're going to set up to cut these sticks, also known as pen blanks, into some wooden dice. So we're going to end up with a shape that's a cube, and it's going to go ahead and have all of the engraving and be cut through on all the different sides. So I have this jig, and I have designed it so that it can all be glued together. These are all the pieces that get glued together. And we have these little pieces right here that are actually our clamps that will slide in and they'll be loose the whole time. Then there's some hardware. These are M3 screws that have a nice big head on it so you can actually grab it almost like a thumb screw. And then we've got nuts that fit into these hexagons here. So how you assemble this, once it's glued together, you drop the nut in there. All you have to do is just cover the hole. You don't have to apply really any pressure. And the screw will thread right in there. And so now it's part of this. It's not going to fall out. The nut may come back out, but all you have to do is just tap it back into that slot. And then we're going to put our little flag piece here for the clamp. And we're going to use 4 of those. So I'm going to go ahead and finish these out. Alright, now that we got the screws in there, we'll put in each of these. I'm only going to do 2 so that I can show you how we put this in. Now, this is important, is that this is just slightly longer than the actual stick. You can see there's a bit of a gap. And so it can slide back and forth here because we really want to be able to accommodate any length in here, so it doesn't really matter. But what we want to do is make sure that we snug it up against this middle piece right here. So this surface right here is actually not going to get cut. That's going to be one of our engraved surfaces later on. And then this chunk at the end is actually going to get cut off. So you can see where each of these slots are is actually going to be where the laser cuts through this piece. Now, my laser is definitely not powerful enough, and I can almost guarantee that yours isn't either, to cut through a 3/4 inch piece of hardwood. However, the technique that I'm using and the way this jig works is that we're going to basically cut through about half of it with each pass. Okay, so now that that's in there, we can just go ahead and tighten these screws down. And it shouldn't fall out. So you can see this holds it in place, and because of the air assist, we had to find some way to clamp this in place so that it didn't blow around as we were cutting it. This is especially important once we get down to the actual dice themselves. So then we put the other flag pieces in here and clamp this last piece in. You can use an Allen wrench to really tighten this down, but you don't want to go too tight or you're going to start separating the wood. Okay, so now that that's in there, these are nice and snug along the middle. You can easily readjust if you need to. And then this piece right here is actually going to be what goes in our laser. So I'm going to show you outside the machine how it works. So we have this little set point right here that I'm going to use to set up my laser and get it in the right position. And then all of these are set up to be able to take these jigs and slide them right on. Now, I originally designed this with magnets in mind, but actually these pins end up being tight enough that you can simply just press it into place. And there you go. That jig is lined up where it needs to be. And in fact, we can put several jigs on there at the same time. This is an older version, so it looks a little bit different, but it's the same concept. We'll go ahead and load it up with a stick. Remember to stick it towards the middle. And don't worry about these being a little bit rough. We're going to sand these in between some steps, so it should be just fine. Alright, and then this one will slide right on there. Okay, so now these are set up in the right position to be able to cut. And then we can take these and put it in our laser machine, and this is built up to be able to have a set of 6 different jigs. And we're going to get 6 dice out of each of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then a little bit at the end. If I was using a table saw to do this, we'd only be able to get 5. Since the kerf is about 1/8 of an inch, we would end up losing that last die. So you do get a little bit of extra benefit because the laser kerf is so thin. So I'm going to take this over to the laser and show you how it gets set up over there. Alright, now that we're at the laser, I'm going to show you my setup over here. So I've got our jig that we had earlier with both pieces in here, and we're going to put it back onto these pins that I have already installed in the machine. And then we're going to make sure that the laser head is aligned to the starting point of my jigs. So you can move it with coarse movement, and then depending on the settings for your laser, you'll have to enter some different keystrokes to get into a fine jog movement. So I'm moving in 0.1 millimeter increments here to just get it really close to the corner of that first jig. Then once it's close, I'm actually pulsing the laser. You'll see it kind of light up here to see where the laser is actually firing. And so we're going to get it as close as we possibly can to that corner. Notice it doesn't exactly line up with the red dot, but that's okay. Now that I have it lined up where I want it, I want to go ahead and press the box button here, and that's just going to show me if the laser is actually going to stay in the right piece and make sure that all of my parameters are set. Now that it's all set up, I'm going to go ahead and run it. So this is actual speed. You can see it swinging back and forth and just starting to engrave the numbers into the blanks. And then I'm going to speed it up just so you can watch it without having to sit here through the several minutes that it'll take. So we're going to go through and engrave all of our blanks with one number, and it can do as many jigs as you've got loaded in here. They're all spaced evenly. And then once all the numbers are engraved onto the jigs, onto the blanks, then we'll go back and we'll actually start cutting these. So you can see it's making multiple passes at the same location, and as it goes it gets deeper with each pass. So it's going to do that in between each dice, and as well as cutting off a little bit of blank off the end. Now this only cuts about halfway through, but since we're going to do this on all four sides, we don't have to worry about how deep it ends up cutting. So we're going to do that for all the dice that are on the machine. Now that they're engraved, just go ahead and get them all cut. Once again, I'm going to speed it up so you don't have to sit through the entire process, but you can see it just works its way through all of the dice. Alright, now that that set's cut, all we have to do is lift the jig out. Normally I would swap it with another one, but instead I'm going to show you how that we rotate this. So we take the screws, loosen them up. You can see where it's cut through about halfway. Doesn't have to be exact, it'll get all the way through as we cut it. And we rotate it backwards like this. So we want to make sure we have the 1 and the 6 on opposite sides, and the 2 and the 4 on opposite sides, and then we'll do the 2 and the 5 on opposite sides, and then we'll do the 4 and the 3 on our cut sides when we get to it. So I'm rotating these. This is as quick as it gets for these. It doesn't take very long with these thumb screws. And if you're having trouble getting them tight, you can very gently use an Allen wrench to tighten it down. I find sometimes the Allen wrench is faster because of how quickly you can grab it. And I'm just making sure that everything's nice and snug. And then you can just drop it right back on your pins. So that's located, that's not going to go anywhere. Alright, and then I'm going to do the same for each of these. And you got to make sure that you're consistent in how you rotate them. Alright, so again, I'm snugging them up on that center piece, and then as I clamp them down, it's going to push them towards the front of the jig, so they're always lined up in the same place. And then by dropping them on these pins, I don't have to spend much time locating it back in there. So I can do all of the flipping and rotating outside while it's cutting, and then as soon as the cut is done, I just swap these jig plates out, and I'm ready to cut the next set. So now that that's all set, we'll go ahead and cut the next side. Alright, now that I've done all 4 sides, you can see I've engraved these, and then there, you can't really see it, but I have engraved the other side. So now that it's all done, we can take it out. You can see that some of these literally just fall apart as they have cut through. Alright, so that's what it looks like. It's not a perfectly smooth surface, but that's okay. And it just breaks apart. There's a little tiny bit in the dead center that's holding it together. This honestly just makes it really easy. As long as they can just pull apart, that'll sand right out, and you won't even see it on the next one. Alright, so now that we're on the sander, I'm going to take those sides that we just cut, and I'm going to push it up against my bench sander. And you can see just with one pass it takes off quite a bit of that. However, there is definitely some contour, so I'm going to make multiple passes here just to clean that side up and get it nice and smooth. Now I'm using a pretty cheap bench sander here, and it works okay, but you can feel it kind of giving and squishing as you push it into it, and making sure that those sides are perfectly perpendicular is pretty tough. And you're going to have to do that on both sides that we've cut just to get it nice and smooth. If you don't do this, then you'll just sand away your number when you go to engrave it. Now we put all those back in the machine. I'm going to use a similar procedure to make sure it's all lined up, and then I'm going to hit my box to make sure that I'm cutting the dice in the right place. So you can see there's just a little bit left from where I engraved it earlier on each of the dice, but that will get sanded away as we do our final sanding. And this is going to look pretty similar to the first time we engraved it, so I'm going to go ahead and speed it back up again, but we're going to go ahead and put our final numbers on to these sides that were cut and sanded. Now you'll notice this is a slightly different jig. Each die is held individually, and that's because there could be a little bit of variation in between each one. I did try making combinations where it was holding 2 or even all 6 at once, but some of the dice would be held really loose while others were held really tight, and if they're loose then they tend to blow out of the machine from the air assist that's being used. So this takes a couple of minutes to go through and engrave each of the dice. The only thing left to do at this point is to sand and apply a finish. I used 220 grit sandpaper and some Danish oil, but hopefully that gave you a good overview of the dice process.